Ja, guten Tag, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren. Hello, good afternoon, good morning from Bamberg in Franconia. I'm very happy to welcome you today to another event in our online series, Bamberger Buch-Geschichten, a series which we've been running for the second time this fall in conjunction, in cooperation with various partners here in Bamberg. Mainly the Volkshochschule Bamberg Stadt, represented by its director Anna Scherbaum, the University of Bamberg, and two historical societies, the Colloquium Historicum Würzbergense and the Historischer Verein Bamberg. This series intends to present themes in the area of book history of relevance to the region of Bamberg. And today we have the most prestigious and famous book printed in Bamberg in the 15th century as our topic, the most famous incunable, which guarantees the town a prominent place in the history of early printing, and a book which is considerably rarer than Gutenberg's own Bible. Only 14 copies of the 36-line Bible survive, as opposed to about 49 copies of Gutenberg's Bible. It is only too easy to forget that it was not always as clear as it is today which one of these two undated editions of the Latin Bible in a large Gothic textura type was the one produced by the inventor of printing in Europe himself. The 42-line Bible or the 36-line Bible. Both fonts were used in Gutenberg's Mainz workshop in the mid-early 1450s. Even after the question of precedence of the two editions had been solved in the 18th century in favor of the B42, the discussion continued about the identity of the printer of the B36. Was it Gutenberg himself, or one of his assistants, Heinrich Käfer, or Albrecht Pfister, who used the B36 type in Bamberg in 1461. Our speaker today, Eric White from Princeton, has very strong arguments for the latter. A previous event in our series in November 2021 focused on Pfister's editions of German narrative texts and biblical works, which he produced in Bamberg in the early 1460s with the B36 type, which he signed and dated and illustrated with woodcuts. This former workshop was recorded, as our workshop today will be, and is still available on our website and on YouTube. As last year, several colleagues have agreed to show their copies of the B36 in a live stream today. I'm very grateful to the colleagues from Manchester, Julian Simpson, from Greifswald, Bruno Blückel and Ivo Asmus, and Christian Winterhalter, and from Würzburg, Christian Malzer, that they have been able to join us today and will be speaking about their treasures. And I'm also very grateful to numerous other colleagues who have provided images, digital material for this lecture. My particular thanks, of course, go to Eric White, who agreed to share his insights into the history of the B36 with us today. Eric White has been curator of rare books at Princeton University Library since 2015, after 18 years as a curator of special collections at Southern Methodist University, the Bridwell Library. He is a renowned specialist in early European printing, and he has published numerous articles and exhibition catalogs on rare books. I want only to mention today two of his major works. He has won the DeLong Book History Prize from the Society for the History of Authorship, Reading and Publishing in 2018 for his most recent book, Editio Princeps, A History of the Gutenberg Bible, published in 2017. In this monumental work, he traced the history of the rediscovery of the first edition of the Latin Vulgate and the fates of the surviving copies from the early 18th century onwards until the present day. In 2013, he published a detailed study on new provenances for 4 copies of the 36-line Bible in the Book Collector. After the dissolution of the monasteries in Catholic southern Germany in the early 19th century, early printed books became extremely mobile, and through the activities of antiquarian dealers and of collectors, entered private collections in Britain, France, and the United States. By unearthing archival sources which had escaped the attention of previous scholars, Eric has successfully brought light into the darkness surrounding the fates of several copies and removed some of the confusion concerning their provenances. He will share his insights with us today. His introduction will be followed by virtual visits to the John Rylands Library in Manchester and to the University Libraries of Greifswald in Germany's far north, and to Würzburg, 100 kilometers west from Bamberg. And finally, after about an hour, we will return full circle to Bamberg in order to cast an eye on a few fragments which survive here in the very city where the Bible was printed more than 560 years ago. Fragments which, as Eric himself stated in his introduction to the book Editor Princeps, are objects for research in their own right and just as worthy of investigation as any other much more intact book, even though they were radically less fortunate than those. I'm looking forward very much to your paper, Eric, and I'm very grateful that you have been able to join us this afternoon. So let us set out on our journey from Princeton now, and I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Bettina, and thank you to everyone in Bamberg who has and is contributing to this, the second in this series of meetings looking so closely at the first typographic works from Bamberg. I've called this little introduction Dispersal and Survival, and I hope it kind of provides a little roadmap to understanding the complex survival histories of only 14 copies, but they present more than 14 problems, as you'll see. Could I have the next slide, please? The question, that's great. The question of Europe's first printed book, or having a great book at the very beginnings of European typography, really arises from an account in the Cologne Chronicle, printed in 1499 in Cologne, where a separate chapter on the art of book printing introduces one of the best sources we have from the 15th century on the invention of printing in Europe. It goes on to say that in the year of our Lord 1450, which was a golden year, printing began, and the first book printed was the Bible in Latin. It was printed with a large letter form, like the letters with which they now, in 1499, print missals. And the first discoverer of printing was a citizen of Mainz, Johann Gutenberg. Believe it or not, this is the first and one of the only early sources that actually says the word Gutenberg and Bible on the same page. And it's a very important source, not so much for that date, 1450, which sounds like a rounded number, but important because it describes this Bible, that there was a first book and that it was a Latin Bible printed with something you can recognize, very large letters like those in the missals. That means Gothic textura script and larger than normal types. Now, there are two 15th century Bibles printed with larger textura, Gothic textura. And can we have the next slide, please? Those are what we now call the 42-line Bible. attributed to Gutenberg with the finances of Fust and the art of Fust-Schöffer involved in Mainz, datable around 1455. That's on the left, the Scheide copy. The other candidate, another undated, unsigned Bible, was this one that we now know comes from Bamberg, and that is the 36-line Bible. But upon the recognition of the importance of the Cologne Chronicle and the search for that first printed book with the large missal-type letters, the two candidates that arose in the 18th century continued into the 19th century as the focus for this debate. It was finally, can I have the next slide, please? It was finally the question of, okay, which types and which Bible come first? Now, there are two types here, and both of them are used in Mainz in the early 1450s. We'll see that the 36-line Bible is based on the design, a larger Gothic letter that you see in the fragment in Mainz at the top, the so-called Sibyllenbuch, datable as possible, early as possible in 1450s, and a slightly smaller, slightly narrower, and some people think slightly more elegant type of Gothic texture, which shows up in the 42-line Bible, represented in its earliest state as well in this Donatus fragment that's here at the Scheide Library. Both of these works are not dated, of course, a fragment of a German poem called the Sibyllenbuch, or a Latin Donatus, which is a school book, just binding fragments, not dated, but datable to the early 1450s. Next, please. The proof came in 1890. Karl Jatzko made a study of the 36-line Bible, and a very, it's always called an elegant proof of the priority of the other Bible, the 42-line Bible. I'm not going to go deeply into it, but on the right is a close-up of a passage in fourth book of Ezra, where the sequence of words at the end of the first chapter should go Angelus Domini vocatus est. And the printers sort of dropped one word down a line to save space. And the rubricator provided a line to show you that you make that little skip and it flows. The compositors of the 36-line Bible followed the word sequence as they are on the page and got something nonsensical because they didn't see the direction that the words were supposed to go. And so by following the B42, our nickname for the 42-line Bible, proved that they had a model in front of them that something existed before. So it's the 42-line Bible comes first. The 36-line Bible follows it as a copy text. In another place, the compositors of the 36-line Bible in an early, a very early stage, skipped a whole leaf of the Genesis, thereby showing they're copying from a copy of the 42-line Bible, and that was corrected in all copies except for the one at Stuttgart. Why don't we go on to the next? And then there is evidence of the copy histories themselves, including rubrication dates. At the upper right is a rubrication date in a 42-line Bible. This one's in Paris at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Heinrich Kremer rubricated the finishing of his chore of adding all the red and blue letters by hand to this Bible. He dated 2 of the volumes in August 1456. By contrast, there's a Bible printed in Latin in Strasbourg by Johann Mentelin. There's a copy in Freiburg, in Breisgau, rubricated in 1460. For the 36-line Bible that we're going to look at today, the earliest rubrication date is belongs to the copy in Wolfenbüttel. The leaf happens to be in Paris because of some creative librarianship in the 19th century. It's dated 1461. So by rubrication dates and other evidence, the 42-line Bible would be the first. I think we need to date the Mentelin-Bibel, the second, and the 36-line Bible, a very close third. 1461 is the rubrication date. Can we have the next, please? There is another reflection of an intention to think about printing the Bible in a wonderful fragment on paper that's in Krakow at the Jagiellonian University Library, a uniquely surviving proof sheet. It's on paper, it's on grubby paper that is printed only on one side. On the other side are the handwritten accounts of a garment cutter in Mainz in the 1380s and 90s. So old waste paper being used for the proofing of a certain typesetting of what has to be 40 lines deep, columns of 40 lines of a page from Genesis. This book apparently went nowhere, but think about it. It's in the 36-line Bible type, but it calculates out to 40 lines per column, 25 of which are preserved here. That's a bigger book, a much bigger book of a book that's already very big. And so this 40-line proof sheet would reflect a very different kind of book. I don't think of it as a preliminary trial run for the 36-line Bible. It's something that would have been on imperial paper. The 36-line Bible and the B42 are on royal paper, a smaller size. And it's in Mainz, probably around 1457. So it's different people, different paper size, and a different textual setting. It's a thing of its own and deserves a great deal of study. Let's move ahead. Next, please. I think it's helpful to look at the 36-line Bible, not in terms always of the volumes, volume 1 and 2. That's because many copies survive, well, it's a rare book. A proportion of the copies survive in three volumes, not 2 volumes. So it can be confusing if you're talking about volume 2, leaf 12. You don't know where you are. It could be volume 2 of 3. It's useful to think about the composition units. These are the units of choirs in which 4 compositors were working simultaneously. One of these typesetters began at St. Jerome's Prologue, went through Genesis, and all the way printing through 4th Kings. That's 266 leaves. Pretty much at the same time, at a slight delay, is another compositor, setting choirs 28 through 45, Chronicles through Psalms. A third is working from Proverbs through Malachi. And then a fourth, both books of Maccabees through the end of the New Testament group. These 4 concurrent composition units, using paper, moving through the type case more or less simultaneously, give us real concrete physical units of the book that are consistent to every copy, regardless of whether they're 2 volumes or 3 volumes. So why don't we go ahead and see how this relates to extant Bibles. Next slide, please. Here is the division if you bind it into 2 volumes and the division if you bind it into 3 volumes. Basically, 2 composition units in volume 1 and 2 in volume 2. Or if you're binding in 3 volumes, 1 composition unit, 1.5 in volume 2, and then another half of, and then the 4th in volume 3. So that gets a little confusing, and that's why I diagrammed it here for you. Let's go on to the next, please. So, for instance, if we want to study the history of a copy that has been broken up and dispersed, and it survives in different libraries, like one we'll be looking at closely today, that's in the Scheide library here in front of me, but part of it's in Manchester with Julianne. She'll show you that today. And then part of it is missing. It's had a confusing history, discovered, parts traded for others, bound with parts that don't belong to it. All very confusing unless you think about the composition units. It's very simple. Composition unit A and D are here at the Scheide Library. They survived together. They were separated in 1815 from each other. Composition unit B is in the Rylands. Lord Spencer eventually owning it. And then C has never been seen throughout its history since its discovery at the end of the 18th century. That third composition unit has never been seen. So we'll return to that in a moment. Next, please. Composition units are interesting because you can see the progress through the paper supply as they're working concurrently. You can also, in this case, see some of the wearing out of the metal types. On the left is the last page of the first composition unit at the end of Fourth Kings. And the types are rounded and not printing very well. And on the right is the beginning of the third composition unit, the fourth composition unit, Maccabees. Very sharp types. This is at the beginning of the printing. This is kind of like what was going on when Genesis was being printed in the early days of this project. So composition units show you the history of the book, and they help you understand the survival of the book in some sense. Let's go ahead. Thanks. Next, please. For instance, the one in front of me has two composition units. We'll be looking at its provenance and its shared provenance with the Rylands copy. I just want to point out, while I can, an inscription at the very top, which says Saint James of this Scottish monastery in Würzburg, the Schottenkloster in Würzburg. That's our earliest securely known provenance for this, but I've discovered some documents that point out an earlier history as well. And I just also included some of the nice rubrication in the New Testament there as well. We can compare this with other books and their rubrication styles later. Next, please. What's interesting about the history of this copy that we know came from the Schottenkloster, that's the Scottish Benedictines in Würzburg, is that the first discoverer of it, who really knew what it was also a member of the Schottenkloster, but in Regensburg, an affiliated Benedictine monastery, a Scottish monk named Alexander Horn, who in the end of the 18th century and into the 19th cared more about libraries and books than he did about his religion, and really made a life of finding great books and making them available to the principal collectors in primarily in Britain. He sold to others as well. Alexander Horn wrote to the second Earl Spencer in 1800 that basically his dream of finding the 36-line Bible has worked out. There is one. It's missing a major section, but he has it, and it's got the most amazing inscription on a vellum leaf at the very front of the ancient binding. And this inscription says that the book was given to the Benedictines of Kloster Aurach, that is the Benedictines at Aura an der Saale in the Diocese of Würzburg, in 1468 by Bishop Georg I of Schaumburg. He's the Bishop of Bamberg, and that ties in very beautifully. I fell off my chair when I found this letter in the British Library. Wait a minute. The Bishop of Bamberg is giving a 36-line Bible to a Benedictine abbey in 1468. Horn begged for Spencer's binder to keep that inscription intact. Of course, that never happened. All we know about that provenance now is this letter in the British Library. Schaumburg was Albrecht Pfister's boss. Albrecht Pfister, who later printed German vernacular picture books in Bamberg in the 1460s, was the secretary for the future and then Bishop of Bamberg, Georg, the first from Schaumburg. So very clear connection between Schaumburg and a 36-line Bible. And for all these years, we've thought maybe Pfister is the printer of the 36-line Bible. His relationship to Schaumburg is key here. Next slide, please. Quick history of the Kloster Aura an der Saal B36. That monastery was founded with Bamberg connections. Otto I, Bishop of Bamberg, founded the monastery in the 12th century. According to the lost inscription recorded by Horn, the Bible was given to that cloister, the Benedictines, by Schaumburg in 1468. That monastery closed in 1564. Its final abbot retired to the Schottenkloster in Würzburg. That's why we see the Schottenkloster Würzburg inscription in this Bible. He died there in 1566. In 1615, the Schottenkloster catalog mentions just such a Bible, incomplete. It goes up through the end of the books of Kings. It continues, has the New Testament and the Psalter. That's this Bible. 1784, Philipp Wilhelm Gerken, on his journeys through Germany, saw a Bible at the Schottenkloster in Würzburg, said it should have had 3 volumes. It's missing parts. It's in missal letters. He guessed that it was printed by Peter Schöffer, and he mentioned that it was dated 1468 at the front. That's this one. But it was Horn who understood what it was and transcribed the inscription and offered it to the Earl of Spencer in London. Spencer then owned it for a while, traded these parts to Jenkinson, Lord Liverpool, in 1815 in exchange for other parts that you'll see that are still in Rylands. And then this came to Scheide in 1991. Better move ahead. Next slide, please. And so we looked at the history of that copy, which is in 3 locations. You can also look at copies in terms of, well, it's in 1 location, but it has 3 sources. And that's true of what Julianne is going to show you with the Bible at the Rylands, Lord Spencer's. 1 unit comes from 1 copy. The second comes from the one I've just been talking about at Kloster Aura. And then the 3rd and 4th come from yet a 3rd copy that was owned by Pinelli in Venice. And he bought that in 1789. Next slide, please. So again, composition units kind of matter. I think we'll have very good pictures of this later, but Spencer's copy and a copy we'll be looking at from the University of Würzburg today amazingly have sort of identical inscriptions in them. The first part of Spencer's Bible that is in the Rylands has at the top some erased inscriptions. When we compare them with the Würzburg copy, we can read them. Can we have the next slide, please? I believe both sets say exactly the same thing in the same style. Essentially, that Joachim Schmidt est possessor meus. Somehow this Joachim Schmidt, who is at Heidenfeld, owned 2 copies of this very rare book. He lived from 1520 to 1587. He was an Augustinian canon at Heidenfeld and owned both of these. Can I have the next slide as well? Here again, slide from Rylands on top and Würzburg on bottom. The Würzburg one is very clearly marked St. Mauritius H. That means, St. Mauritius and in Heidenfeld. That is the dedication of the Augustinians there. I believe the Rylands inscriptions now erased say the same thing. Let's have the next, please. I'm going to go very quickly through the rest of the surviving B36s so that we have a sense of their earliest evidence. The Schellhorn Bible, Johann Georg Schellhorn was one of the first discoverers of the 36-line Bible and to study it. He owned 2 volumes, now at Stuttgart, a middle volume, the second volume at Munich, really appears to be so similar it might match up. I kind of believe it does. It is from the Benedictines at Fultenbach by inscription. Next, please. Very quickly, the British Library's copy has an inscription here seen under what must be UV, that it's St. Michael in Metten. Those are the Benedictines at Metten. I think Alexander Horn also brought this book to England. George III owned it. Next, please. In Vienna, 3 complete volumes, one inscribed that it was a gift of Johann Pirkheimer. This is the grandfather of the Nuremberg humanist Pirkheimer in 1487. And the book has Carthusian lection markings throughout. So it looks like he gave it to the Carthusians in Nuremberg in 1487. Next, please. In Paris is what used to be the Earl of Oxford's Harleian copy. It then went to Wolfenbüttel, and then Napoleonic times went to Paris. It should have been returned in 1815, but the librarians there sent back a different copy, and that's in Wolfenbüttel today. This is historically the Wolfenbüttel copy. It has the coat of arms of Peter Knorr, who died in 1478. He was a cleric with affiliations in Bamberg and Nuremberg. Next, please. The Wolfenbüttel copy documentation I found early on matches up with it being from Carmelites in Würzburg. Next, please. Oh, and that's the one that had the 1461 rubrication date. In Antwerp, the Plantin Moretus Museum has this copy in an original Bamberg binding. It came from the Augustinian hermits in Nuremberg in 1514. Next, please. Let's see, Erlangen. In my article, I finally kind of successfully argued that this was the copy, not another one, that was owned by Georg Wilhelm Panzer, the great incunable cataloger. Panzer, turns out, studied this copy. He did not own this copy. There's an 1801 learned article in the Intelligenzblatt, der Literaturzeitung, 1801, where it's clearly pointed out that Panzer didn't own it, he studied it. Good guess is the Heilbronn Cistercians for the Erlangen copy. Next, please. Yeah, comment says Heilsbronn. Yes, thank you. This is the Jena copy, one of the first to be studied. It has inscriptions from Heinrich Scheib, possibly the Leipzig professor of the same name, who died in 1524. Next, please. Leipzig has a copy with Leipzig illumination, no early provenance that I'm aware of. Next, please. And I'm very excited to be seeing the Greifswald copy today, a copy I have not seen. I have nothing to add except that it also has this northern Leipzig style illumination. And it comes from the Wolgast Petrikirche. And I'm just going to point out that that church was founded and Wolgast was Christianized by our Bishop of Bamberg, Otto I, in the 12th century. That would make 2 or 3, Bibles that have connections to maybe Schaumburg celebrating his relationship with Otto I of Bamberg historically. That's just a guess. Let's go on, please. Next. I better finish up. I've taken a lot of time. Another category of study is the fragments, an amazing catalog of like 88 different leaves from one copy, surviving in Bad Wildungen and in Marburg archives. And this is a topic that many of you may not know about, but we also study, when a book gets cut up and wrapped around archival documents and stored away. it's still telling us quite a bit about its history. And it looks like the 88 leaves from this vellum copy, not paper. Everything I've shown you is paper. This vellum copy was probably in Fitzlar in Hessen, much to the northwest of where the rest of these have been. And we even know the name of the binder who was assigned to cut these up in the 1680s. Christian Scheider, I think it is. Next, please. And you don't want to get into this, but if you compare the rubrication styles and provenances of all the 36-line Bible vellum fragments, you might agree that they break down into sort of 8 rubrication groups. That's not to say 8 copies, because 2 different rubricators can work in the same copy, but a maximum, perhaps, of 8 different copies are represented in binding waste in vellum. And then the next, please. Looks like 2 copies are represented in paper binding waste. One's here at the Scheide Library and a group similar to that, and others in Bamberg. And then finally, last slide, please. I can improve on this map, but here is a map of the early survival traces of the 36-line Bibles. They're really centered on Bamberg. They extend in that vicinity, to Würzburg, etc. Number 2 there, Fritzlar. Fritzlar is an outlier, I would say, as is, of course, Wolgast, way up in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, and we'll be seeing more of that from Greifswald today. That's my introduction, and I hope that when we see the copies themselves, that'll open up lots of great questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this very concise and instructive introduction, full of information about a large number of copies. I think we move to Manchester first. So, Julianne, could you please turn on your video and sound and tell us a little about your copy?
Okay, welcome to Manchester. It will just take me a moment to get the copy up on the screen, and if you're patient with me, and then we can talk about it. Okay. Right. So this is the binding of Volume 1, which has the arms of Earl Spencer. So this is George John Spencer, the second Earl, who was collecting from about 1789 until his death in 1834. And this collection came to Manchester in 1892. So a purchase made by Henrietta Rylands when she was setting up the John Rylands Library. We opened to the public in 1900, originally an independent library foundation by Henrietta Rylands with money from that she inherited from her husband, John Rylands. And we became part of the University of Manchester in 1972. So the purchase of the Spencer Library by Mrs. Rylands in 1892 meant that the library of the second Earl Spencer came to Manchester almost in its entirety. So we have that here today. And one of the particular strengths of the collection is in early printing. We are currently working on a project to upgrade our descriptions of all our incunabula. So we're about a quarter of the way through that. We've been going for just over a year. And this is one of the books that we have already recatalogued, and this has been digitized as well. So we have, it is available for anyone to have a look at. After this session, we can maybe add the link or send the links out to people. So Eric has already mentioned about the complicated makeup of this set, and I'm hoping that he will continue to contribute while I'm showing some pages as well to explain what's going on and what we have. So we start at the beginning of volume, the first volume, and I'll zoom in a bit. I hope. Takes a little while to adjust the camera just to get it in the right place. Mm-hmm. So I've zoomed in there. You can see the inscriptions that Eric mentioned that are erased at the top of this page. And we have been able to do multispectral imaging on these inscriptions to help us get a bit of a clearer view of them. So I'm just going to bring this work, add that in underneath. Obviously, this is just I've just printed this off in black and white, so it doesn't give you all the detail to be able to read on this screen, as you might be able to see in the original image. But the Joachim Schmidt inscription, you see, comes up very clearly. I think when Eric was here to look at it, we looked at it under a UV light, so it's not. Although it's multispectral imaging, it's not completely magic. It's simply UV that has shown this up, and you can see the difference from where it had been erased to what we can see now with the UV on it. Comes up a lot clearer. So Eric, was there anything else you wanted to
Well,
say about?
I think that also shows that it probably says Sancta Mauritius or Saint Mauritius Eidenfeld at the top left. Yeah.
Up there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's amazing that one 16th century Augustinian had two copies of the rarest, available Bible. Rarest today. Yeah.
So we'll go to the second section.
Yeah.
And this is the image that you've already seen in Eric's presentation, the Schottenkloster of Würzburg. And just zoom out a bit as well so that you can see the end of the previous section.
Yeah, very, very clear there that, the printers ended the first composition unit, had only one column. In no way were they going to start, the book of Chronicles here in the second column. So they just, leave that blank. And then months ago, they've already started what's on the right. So we're looking at two different time periods, the end of a composition unit and the beginning of another, a big time separation, and dull type on the left, sharp type on the right.
Mm-hmm. A bit. And also at the end of this section, go in a bit more, there is another inscription.
Oh, yeah, good.
At the bottom here.
Yeah, I think that might be Saint Mauritius.
So that's Saint Moritz again.
Yeah.
That's it under the multispectral imaging again.
Nice.
Just here.
Okay, thanks.
And also just to go back a little bit, hopefully I can do this easily enough to the beginning of the book before, you can see the difference as well in the rubrication and the decoration of the initials. So this is the first, say, historic section or provenance copy joined together with this one from the Schottenkloster. So this is the Heidenfeld, this is Schottenkloster, where without any additional decoration.
Very clear.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If that's, I'll move to volume 2.
Okay.
We good? Yeah. Be back in a moment.
Yeah.
So different decoration again from what we've just seen. So this is part of the third copy, as it were. The earliest provenance of this is Pinelli, isn't it, Eric,
right,
from the 16th century. So this one doesn't have any earlier German monastic provenance.
Haven't traced it
we
from
know
Maffeo Pinelli, and that's more like 18th century. Yeah, I think any earlier Pinelli there's no evidence.
No.
I think I guessed there had been some earlier Pinelli family members, but not wisely.
I'm just adjusting the focus.
Here's good. Yeah, this is the nicest publication we've seen yet. It's really, really beautiful.
Let's have a look through, and I've also marked the fourth section as well, so that we can just see that in this copy. This is where we get another break in the composition units, the end of Malachi, the beginning of Maccabees.
Right. Yeah. Same original copy, but yes, a composition unit break. Yep. This is what Earl Spencer traded for, and so he still has it. He got this from, it had been in Sir George Shuckborough's private collection since 1789.
Should we, unless anyone has questions, we can move on to the next copy. Is that what we do? Okay.
Well, could you show us the New Testament?
Sure.
Yeah.
I haven't marked it, but I can find it.
Yeah, sorry.
Actually, we've yeah, there we are.
There you go. Yeah. I just think that B is one of the most beautiful of yeah. Very nice.
Okay, thank you. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much indeed, Julianne. So our next copy comes from Greifswald, and it's...
Hello. Welcome to the Greifswald copy, and I'm very proud to show you first a little bit about the provenance of our copy, of two-volume copy. Here can you see the Catalogus Bibliotheke Wolverständes. Some was handwritten by the pastor and repositorist Lawrence Stanisla in the beginning of the 19th century. And he had help of the Greifswald librarian Christian Rüß. Some 1810 went to Berlin to the university as a professor. And those had a short title catalogue, and numbers 210 and 211, Hieronymi Biblia et cetera sine loco et anno. It was identified later, die berühmte sogenannte 36-zeilige Bibel. And we are very proud to show you our extraordinary copies and bindings. The 2 volumes are restored, but they have quite a lot of the original binding material. As you can see here, die Beschläge and also but you can see it was made in the 50s that the binding was restored. And here we have the beginning of the first volume, and it's quite similar to this in Leipzig and in Wien, in Vienna. And we show you the second volume also.
So you see a lot of it is very similar to the Vienna and sort of Paris volume, but you see there are very large and also with gold trolleys and book bindings. See it also on the second with gold images and also with a lapis lazuli. And so we can see in this place that the provenience was very high. And we think the book, the Floriny, is going to Saxonia and around Saxonia, but we think it cannot see any bevice proofs of it, but I think it sends to Saxonia. And of course, we think this comes to Pomerania, Wolgast, via the principles of this, but it's not proved. So if you see in the second binding also these gold initials in this place, then this very expensive blue. And of course we have another gold initials we show you. Wow. Sorry. We also the famous in the Psalter, we see King David, and it's very famous. Yes. And I think it's quite different from the Manchester copy, especially in the initials and also in the book. Another copy sorry, we have 2 volumes, and so we have to check. You can see in volume 2 there is a copy of the first Saxonian principles, and it is from Friedrich III of Saxony, Emperor of Oh, okay. And you can see this copy, and we have this, and you know, we have it also described in the. So this is the way it shows to the previous owners. We don't know, and we have no proofs from the way of the copies from Bamberg to Wolgast. That is quite unknown history, but from Wolgast, of course, it's known. And I think we are very lucky because nobody knows of these copies. And if you see our first picture, that this was the famous B36. It was recognized in the 1880s. And so all the problems during the French Revolution and all these movings were not at Greifswald because nobody knows that at Wolgast was a copy of the B63. And so we are lucky, and we have complete 2 volumes of these famous copies. So that is what we can tell you about the originals, and if you want to see special pages, we can show it to you, and you can ask. So.
Are there questions from Eric White or Ernix?
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. I think what I would like to know is if the connection between Bamberg and Wolgast, which Eric mentioned, the foundation by Otto I, did that still play a role in later centuries? Was there any exchange?
It played a role in the 19th century, but not in the times when the library in Wolgast was collecting the old libraries of different monasteries in the region. So we're not sure how this Bible came to the church library, and it was a guess that the Saxonian princes donated this Bible to the Pomeranian princes, but it's not proof for this. It may be that perhaps the connection from Bamberg to Wolgast was in that time the book was printed in the minds of the bishop, and that he perhaps sent it to Wolgast to the princes, but it's not very sure because of the paintings of the initials and the whole it has a connection with Saxonia rather than with Pomerania.
Yeah.
But way from Saxonia to Pomerania is not proven.
The paintings are showing clearly to Saxonia and not to Pomerania.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, maybe art historians can later on, when we have a more open discussion, say something about the painted decoration. The peacock is a work which occurs in Leipzig, manuscripts and incunables too, I think, but maybe we postpone that question. Eric, do you have any comments or questions?
Not specifically. I'm really pleased to see that much of it. This is a copy that has been somewhat of a unknown, at least in these parts. The great Paul Schwenke saw it more than 100 years ago, so it's well described. But it's great to see this much. Unless you want to show any more initials, I see you're in volume 2. I think we should probably keep the clock going, but
yes, I think
it's up to you, Bettina.
I think we should maybe move on to Würzburg.
Okay.
Thank you very much to Greifswald, and
Yes,
want
thank you.
to particularly thank Falk Eisermann for establishing contact to, and the Greifswald colleagues for actually acquiring a visualizer and document camera just for this purpose. It was wonderful that you were so cooperative, and I hope more will be discovered about the history of this very impressive volume. So over to Christian Malzer from the University Library of Würzburg now.
So, hello everybody. I will start with some slides and then move over to the camera. So you should see my presentation now. Well, a few words about our collection first, and then we will move on to the copy of the 36-line Bible in our university library. Among the holdings of the University Library of Würzburg are some 3,000 incunabler. So it's, in comparison with other research libraries in Germany, a medium-sized collection. The bulk of our collection is made up of the acquisitions due to the secularization at the beginning of the 19th century. And one of the incunabler that belonged to a monastic or clerical library outside of the town of Würzburg before 1803 is our copy of the 36-line Bible, which now has the shelf mark ITF1. And according to a former head of our library, Gottfried Melzer, it's the most valuable incunable of our collection. So let's take a closer look. As you can see here on the curve of our copy, there is a lettering telling us that it's the prima pars, so the first volume of the Bible. And it was printed on paper. It contains 405 leaves, so it might be the composition units A and B with some leaves missing. And it stops or ends with the words explizit Liebe Job, so with the first book of wisdom from the Old Testament. What's quite special, or a special attribute of our copy, is the original binding, the original cover that was made up of calfskin over wood. And it's special because the binding was made by a bookbinding workshop from Bamberg, the so-called Bamberger Meister or Bischöflicher Meister. And we will see some pictures of that right now, and I will show it via video. You'll see that the fittings are missing, so the corner and medium fittings, they might have been removed in the 19th century, but it's obvious that it was produced in Bamberg because of the stamps that were used in the 15th century, and I tried to give you the IDs of the Einbanddatenbank, and I will show you some details. So, for example, the double lily, which is quite obvious, or this walking bird with spread wings. So they are clearly made in Bamberg in the 15th century, and especially during the first period of the workshop of the Bischöflicher Meister. So I will switch over to our camera and show you the volume. So what we see here is it's quite bulky volume. It's brown calfskin, and the two, not only the fittings are missing, but also the strap buckles are missing. But 2 years ago, we made a great find in our collections, we found the missing strap, which might have been lost in the 19th century. And since the year 2021, it's part of our collection again. So it's a single piece of the original binding, but at least it's also a piece of history. So we'll take a closer look to the inside, and you will see that the decoration style is quite similar to the copy from Manchester. I will show you some slides with better photos also, because what's interesting is the ownership history of this Bible. We have 3 ownership entries, one on the mirror and one on the bottom and one on the top margin of folio 1. Another thing I want to show you is that there are some margins and some text corrections all around in this volume, and the text corrections are really referred to false parts of the text. So there must have been an owner who really was interested in the text of the Bible. And there are different styles, so at least 2 of the owners or 2 hands have taken margins and annotations which really refer on the correction of the text. And what's also interesting is the style of decoration, because we have some initials. Usually the Lombards are in red or in blue, and some of the initials with Fleuronnet are just the drawings, and they weren't really completed in the style. They were composed in the first drawing. So I will maybe switch back to the photos, because they are much better than the camera. And I will show you some parts which are really interesting in my opinion, because then we will return to Joachim Schmidt once again. So the oldest ownership entry of this volume is dated from the late 15th century, and it's written down in Latin and tells us that the volume belonged to the Domus Ortus Mariae in Ilmbach, a Carthusian monastery, which is situated right between in the middle of Bamberg and Würzburg. It's one of the youngest foundations of the order in Franconia, and it was a quite poor charter house. And as we can tell from the manuscripts we own from that library, it only had a short period of bibliophilic prosperity between the 1470s and the 1520s before it was destroyed in the so-called Bauernkrieg of the year 1525. And therefore I have 2 theories about the original acquisition of the Bible. So the copy might have been bought or donated only a few years after the foundation of the charter house in 1455. And the volume is a witness of the building up process of the local library. And it's not the only witness. We have 5 more manuscripts from the same period in our collection. The second point is that the Bible probably left Ilmbach during the first decades of the 16th century, at latest in the 1540s or 1550s. Maybe it was sold as a consequence of the desolation of the charter house in 1525. And that's the link to the second and third ownership entry. We can read it's the entry of Joachim Schmidt. And here we can see it clearly. It tells us Joachim Schmidt as Possessor Neos, and on the cover mirror, the detail on the left side, Joachim Schmidt. And it's written in a style of hand of the middle of the 16th century. And as we know nowadays, Joachim Schmidt was the provost of the Augustinian canonry of Heidenfeld, which is only about 25 kilometers away from Ilmbach. So maybe the copy was sold from Ilmbach to Heidenfeld. And if we take a closer look to our incunabula collection, I can tell you that we have 6 more incunabula that belong to Joachim Schmidt, and 4 of them definitively became property of him after the year 1554. So it's probably that they were sold to build up the also destroyed library of Heidenfeld once again, because Heidenfeld was desolated in the so-called Markgräflerkrieg in the years 1553 and 1554. And that would fit to the fact that Schmidt, or Faber, as he called himself in the Latin style of the period, was a bibliophilic provost of this community, and tried to collect the lost volumes from the original library. So at last I have a last theory or suspicion about the history of the copy of the 36-line Bible, which nowadays belongs to the University Library. In my opinion, it was acquired by Joachim Schmidt together with other incunabula to rebuild the library collection of the canonry of Heidenfeld after the Markgräflerkrieg, and after his death in 1587, the Bible remained in Heidenfeld until 1803, when it became the most valuable part of the incunabula collection of the University Library as a consequence of the secularization. So that would be the things I can tell you about our copy of the 36-line Bible.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you very much, Christian Malzer, for this slideshow and the glance of the original pages. Eric, any questions from your side? Or?
Well, it's just very interesting that the book that started off with the Carthusians at Ilmbach has throughout marginal lection markings with the P, S, and T for prima, secunda, tertia, and alphabetical indications of when passages are reread. So that's just a nice early signs of use, definitely in a Carthusian context. And I know there are people studying that closely as well. Thank you.
So shall we move on to the last example from Bamberg? Unfortunately, I can only show you fragments. The State Library in Bamberg does not own a copy of the 36-line Bible. It had a chance in 1804 when, from a Carmelite library in the bishopric of Würzburg, a copy was for sale for 30 Carolines. But unfortunately, the library in Bamberg lacked sufficient funds to acquire this. The official documents say that the cost of moving the books and the bookcases were too high, that alone amounted to 600 guilders, and the sale of duplicates was not profitable enough. So the library in Bamberg, which had been founded the previous year, had to go without this wonderful acquisition. And I think Eric could tell us where that book ended up, which Bamberg missed narrowly. What I want to show you today is part of our fragments collection. Just have to turn over the technical equipment, so just a moment. Yeah. As you can see, it's the fragments have been bound in modern leather wrappers, and they actually consist of 2 volumes bound in the same style. The first volume contains 9 paper leaves, and the second volume a vellum fragment. All those items were discovered between 1800 and 1815 by Alexander Schmötzer, who was one of the first librarians of the library in Bamberg in that period. And he died in 1815. He had suffered a fall from a ladder in the library and fell ill. And so we can date his discovery in the first 15 years of the 19th century. The binding is probably contemporary. And the most interesting aspect of the Bamberg copy is the table of rubrics, which I'm showing you here. It's one of the 6 surviving fragments of the table of rubrics. It's page 3, leaf 3. Originally, the table of rubrics consisted of 5 leaves on 3 sheets. And our copy here in Bamberg is actually identical to a newly discovered leaf in Halle, in the University Library, which Brigitte Pfeil published a few years ago. So the total of copies of the table of rubrics is now 6. They're kept in Munich, in the State Library in Cambridge, Paris, Halle, and Bamberg. So as to the provenance of the Bamberg fragments, we don't exactly know from which volume Alexander Schmötzer took those leaves. It's been recorded by another one of the first librarians that he discovered fragments in manuscripts from the Benedictine monastery of the Michelsberg, but also in documents from the city archives of Bamberg, and that has not yet been identified which copy came from which provenance. They're actually doing research on the Bamberg fragments, on the painted decoration, in the course of a project to catalog our 15th century illuminated manuscripts and the incunabula. And I'm hoping that the art historical research will shed some more light on where the illumination comes from. So this is just a very brief glimpse of the paper fragments, the table of rubrics, and the paper fragments here in Bamberg. So that's all from my side. Back to Eric.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, did you have a vellum fragment?
Oh, do you want to see that too? Yeah.
Oh, why not?
Just have to stand up and get it.
Okay, why not? Yeah, thank you. It's nice to see how it was very early on an object of bibliographical curiosity, in that it's inscribed and preserved at an early date.
So I have to get used to this camera a little bit here.
Yeah.
Here we are. Another very similar binding. And here's the vellum fragment. Try to focus a little.
Okay, yeah.
My colleagues will post links to our online digital collections where you can see all the fragments in more detail. I don't know, but it doesn't focus very much. I'll zoom in a bit.
Yeah, even on Zoom, it pixelates. So
Yes.
yeah. But there on the right, this early inscription showing that in the 18th, around 1800, there's bibliographic interest in knowing what these things are.
Yes. Yep. This is.
Right. And among all the other vellum fragments, I haven't found any of them that have that same kind of rubrication, that chapter, the CA for capitula, and so it may be a unique survivor, but that's hard to tell with fragments.